Hello, once again, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our virtual classroom. Let's go ahead and get started with today's lesson. And today we're going to be focusing on lesson 20-3. I do apologize for the mistake here. This was supposed to be a 20-3. I'll make it in black to make it easier to see. 20-3. The numbers in this lesson that we are going to be doing are numbers 1, 2, 6, 8 through 10, as well as number 14. Again, that's 1, 2, 6, 8 through 10, and number 14. As always, I encourage you to pause this video as you copy things down and then continue once you have finished. So you can just listen closely. So assuming you've copied all this down, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be talking even more about fractions, decimals, and percents. And the first thing I want to discuss are what are known as benchmark fractions, benchmark decimal, benchmark percents. Think of a benchmark as something that you should know, something that is expected of you. Hence why we have the benchmark test. If you guys have ever heard of that, that's a test over stuff that you should know already. Think of benchmark multiplication tables, like the 1s through the 12s. You're expected to know your 1s, your 2s, your 3s, your 4s, your 5s, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12s. If you know your 13s, awesome. If you know your 14s, even better, I guess. But no one is expecting you to know those. I don't even know those by memory. But yeah, same thing. When you see a certain fractions, we expect you to know what that fraction is as a decimal and what that is as a percent as well, just by looking at it without having to figure it out. Okay, so for example, here we have 1 over 100, or 1/100th. 1/100th as a fraction. If you remember the definition of a percent, remember percent is always over 100. This is 1 over 100, or 1%. 1% literally means 1 over 100, 1%, right? If I read it correctly, 1/100th, that's exactly where it is as a decimal. We have 1 in the hundredths place, so it's 1/100th. Now, yes, you could also figure this out just by actually working it out. Remember, this means division. So 1 divided by 100, I can do 1 divided by 100. 100 cannot fit into 1, so I put a decimal. It cannot fit into 10, so I put a 0, but it can fit into 100 exactly one time. And there it is, 1/100th. Going from a decimal to a percent, if you will recall our fizzy drink, which is Dr. Pepper, saying that if we're starting with a decimal, which we are, we can make it into percent by moving it to the right, from the D to the P. We always move it twice. No matter what, ladies and gentlemen, when we're changing a decimal to a percent or a percent to a decimal, we only move it twice. If we're starting with a percent to a decimal, we move to the left. If we do it from a decimal, like we have here, to a percent, we move to the right 2 spots, so that would be 1%. I expect you guys to know that. You don't have to copy all the working out that I did, as long as you understand that all these are the same. Let's move on to the next one. We have 1/4. 1/4 is one of those that should be pretty intuitive. Another way of saying 1/4 is 1/4. A quarter, it means 1/4, right? And if you think of money, a quarter literally is 1/4 of a dollar. Now, how many cents is a quarter? A quarter is 25 cents. Because it's 25 out of 100 that you need to make a dollar, so it's 25%. It's 25% of a dollar. There is a quarter. Now, again, if we remember our Dr. Pepper, we put DP. This time we're going for a percent to a decimal, so I move it twice to the left, and that would be 25 hundredths, which makes sense because 25 over 100 is 25 hundredths. But again, I expect you to just know those. Now, 1/3 is a bit of an odd one. If we look at 1/3, this is one of those where you're just going to have to remember and know. Because to go from 1/3 into a decimal, remember, this always means divide. So it's going to be 1 divided into 3. 3 cannot go into 1, but it can go into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. 10 minus 9 is 1. Let's keep going, bring down the 0. You're going to notice, ladies and gentlemen, that it's going to give me 3, 3, 3, 3. It's going to go on forever. You will never be able to write it all out if you try to write it as a decimal. Hence why right here as a decimal, I put 0.3, and you just put a line over that because it's just saying that same number is going to be repeated over and over again forever. I don't expect you to understand that concept, but I do expect you to know that 1/3, if I try to write it as a decimal, you're never going to finish. It's going to be 0.333 forever. So what do I do about a percent? Well, we're going to move the decimal over twice. It is going to be 33. And instead of writing 0.33333, I'm going to put 1/3 percent. 33 and 1/3 percent. 1/3 is 33 and 1/3 percent. All right. Moving on. Next, the next few are pretty intuitive. Beginning with 1/2. 1/2, perhaps one of the easiest ones, one that I expect you to be extremely familiar with. 1/2. If you divide 1 by 2, you will find that that is equal to exactly 0.5. 0.5 and 1/2 are exactly the same thing. You should know that like that. So you see 1/2, you should think 0.5. Which a percent expressed as a percent, we should know that half is the same thing as 50%. If you get 50% of something, you're getting half of it. If something is 50% off, that means it's half off. You're taking off half of it. If your battery on your laptop or phone is at 50%, then you know that it's halfway. All right, so 1/2 is 0.5, 50%. Next, we have 3/4, which is actually very similar to 1/4. In that, notice that they have the same denominator. 3/4 has the same denominator as 1/4. But whereas 1/4 was 1/4, 3/4 is 3/4. And if I give you 3/4, how much money is that? Well, each quarter is 25, so 25.50. So it would be 75 cents out of 100. So it's 75 out of 100. So it's 75 per 100, 75%. Move the decimal twice. That's the same thing as 0.75. Good. The next one we have 1/10. 1/10, if you just say that correctly, we see that 1/10 is the same thing as 1/10, 0 and 1/10. That's literally what I'm writing here. You divide 1 by 10, you're going to get 1/10, 0.1. Move the decimal. So we have our Dr. Pepper, DP. So we're going from a decimal to a percent. So we move it twice, 1, 2. That's going to be 10%, which is exactly what I have over here. 10%. 1/10 is the same thing as 1/10, which is the same thing as 10%. 1/5, if you divide 1 by 5, 5 cannot fit into 1, but it does fit into 10 twice. So it's going to be 2/10. It's actually twice as large as 1/10, because 1 times 2 is so 2/10. With the decimal over twice, we get 20%, which again is twice of 10%. Awesome. Now, finally, we have one whole. Right, we have 1, which is 1 whole. And what's interesting about 1 whole is that oftentimes when we think of the number 1, we think of something that is quite small. But out of all of these quantities, 1 whole is the largest of all of these. 1 is 100%, ladies and gentlemen. 1 whole of anything is 100%. If somebody gives you a whole pizza, they're giving you 100% of the pizza. They're not giving you half of it. They're not giving you 3%. They're not giving you 1/4 of it. They're not giving you a quarter. They're giving you 100% of it. 100% of it, not 25%, not 50%, not 75%, 100% of it. So you can see that the number 1 can be thought of as actually a pretty large quantity. All right, it can be pretty small. 100% of an M&M is 1 whole M&M, which is pretty small. But 100% of a wedding cake is massive. It's the whole thing, right? Now, of course, if we move the decimal over twice, we get 1.0. That is the decimal equivalent. And by the way, remember, percents are always over 100. So 100% is the same thing as 100 over 100. And 100 divided by 100 is equal to 1. It's the same thing as over here, 1 whole. All right. So I hope that all of these are benchmarks that you can be familiar with. And with that in mind, let's go ahead and go into our assignment. Let's go into OneNote and let's focus on number 1. Let us focus on number 1. Erase all this. And we'll do number 2 and number 6 as well. All right, what we're about to see, we're going to cover more in depth later, so don't worry too much about it, but it is quite simple. It is quite simple. All right, we're going to begin with 1C, and we see that in 1C, we're given 51.2%, and we want to change that into a fraction. Anytime, ladies and gentlemen, anytime that you have a percent, please remember that that percent can be written as a fraction by simply taking the percent sign off, leaving that number there, and putting that number over 100. In many ways, the percent symbol becomes the fraction bar and the 100 below it. 51.2% is 51.2 over 100. Now, technically, there it is. That is 51.2% is a fraction. It's 51.2 over 100. However, we don't like decimals and fractions mixing together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this 51.2. I'm going to take that decimal and I want to move it to the end. I'm going to hop as many times as I need. In this case, I just have to hop one time to make it into a whole number. Well, at least the top number into a whole number. So I have 512. But as I'm sure you will understand, whenever I change something in the numerator, if I want to keep the fraction exactly the same, I must do the same thing to the denominator. So I'm going to take this right here. It's 100. It's not 10. It's not 1. It's 100 and move it over one time as well, because I moved it once, I'm going to move it once. If I had to move it twice, I would move it twice. If I would move it 10 times, I would have to move it 10 times. So I am left with 512 over 100, over 1,000, sorry. So again, we started with 51.2%, which is the same thing as 51.2 over 100, move the decimal over 1 in each. Now it's 512 over 1,000. These two are equivalent, but now there's no more decimal. Of course, we must simplify. So I'm going to divide both of these by 8. You could divide by 2 and then by 2 again and by 2 again. I'm just going to divide by 8 because I know that's the greatest common factor, which will yield, this will give me 64, I believe, yep, over 125. 64 over 125. Yes, that is correct. All right, so again, we start with a percent. We put that number over 100, that's a percent. Move the decimal over to make the numerator, to get rid of the decimal, to put it at the very end. So now I have 512, but I must do the same thing on the denominator. And then I simply simplify. And so on Schoology, ladies and gentlemen, on 1C, if I can go to 1C, you would write 64/125, no spaces. That's it. That is in simplest form. All right, let's do the same thing for number 2, but this time we have to change it to a decimal and to a fraction. Now, to a decimal should be no surprise to any of you. You simply take 50.8%. Even though there's a decimal, ladies and gentlemen, this is considered a percent because it has a percent symbol right here. So I'm going to do my Dr. Pepper, decimal and percent. And in this case, we're starting with a percent. So that means that to make it into just the decimal, I need to move the decimal to the left 2 times because I'm going from decimal, from percent to decimal, percent to decimal, percent to decimal. So I'm going to move it 1, 2. That gets rid of that. So now it would be 0.508. 0.508. So that's 508 thousandths. There it is as a decimal, 508 thousandths. All right, now let's convert it to a fraction. So let me start at the beginning again. I'm beginning with 50.8%. And remember, you will recall that a percent is always over what number? I'm just going to write the number, 50.8. And instead of the percent symbol, I'm going to put it over 100. 50.8 over 100. Now that is technically a fraction, but again, we don't like decimals in our fractions. So I'm going to take that decimal and move it over 1 time to the right. So I have to move it over 1 time to the right. It is now 508 over 1,000. Now notice how these two are exactly the same thing. 508 thousandths, 508 thousandths. Interesting. They definitely check out. However, let's go ahead and simplify this. You can divide each of these by 4. And that will give me, what would that be? 127, I believe. 127 over 250. And that would be in simplest form. 127 over 250. All right, again, so over here on Schoology, on blank number 2, I would put 127 over 250. 127 over 250. Notice there's no spaces, nothing like that. Okay, let's try one more. Letter B. We're going to do the exact same thing. We're starting with 32.4%. I want to change it to a decimal. Here's my D and my P. So I'm going to go from a percent to a decimal. So I'm going to move it to the left twice. So that would be 0.324 or 324 thousandths. Right? If you think about it, I can already go from here to this, 324 thousandths, because that's the same thing. Now, if you do it the other way, we start with 32.4%, which is 32.4 over 100. We have to move the decimal over to make it into 324 in the numerator. I must move it over here as well, so over 1,000, right? And there it is. It's the same thing. 324 over 1,000. Let's go ahead and simplify that. We can divide each of these by 4. And that is going to give me 81 over 250. 81 over 250. 81 over 250. And that is in simplest form now. We're going to cover more of that later, ladies and gentlemen. But for now, and again, I encourage you to pause this and watch that again if you've got a little lost. No problem with that. All right. Now going over to number 6, I'm not going to do this for you. Well, we can do the first one if you like, but really we're comparing these two quantities. Now it's hard to compare them because they are in different forms, right? So let me change this into a decimal. So let's divide 5 by 7. 5 divided by 7. 7 cannot go into 5, but it does go into 50 7 times because 7 times 7 is 49. We have a remainder of 1. Bring down the 0. 7 goes into 10 just one time. 7 times 1 is 7. We have a remainder of 3. Bring down the 0. 7 goes into 30 4 times because 7 times 4 is 28. We have a remainder of 2. Bring down the 0. 7 goes into 20 twice because 7 times 2 is 14. So that's going to be a remainder of 6. Now I could keep going or I can just stop right there. I don't know how far that's going to go, but I have this so far. Now the reason why I can stop is because to make a decimal into a percent, I just have to move it over twice. So far I have 71.42%. So it's going to keep going. So it's going to get even slightly bigger, if you will. And what is larger, 71.4 something or just 71%? I think that one's obvious. So for each of these, for example, on this we have a decimal. I'm going to move it over twice to go from a decimal to a percent. So I'll move it to the right twice. It's 56.25%. What's larger? Well, they both have a 56, but then this one has a 2 on the 10th place and this one has a 4. So clearly 56.4% is larger, even though it has less digits. That should not be a surprise to any of you. So go ahead and do each of these, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to stop right there. There are more problems, but I want you to try those on your own. Those are just bonus. Those won't count for a grade. But do try those problems on your own. And if you have any questions, go ahead and email me or we can cover them in class the next time we meet. All right, that'll be it for now, ladies and gentlemen. I don't want to make this video too long, and I will see you next time.